When Lorcana releases their first chapter set, how many cards do they need to print? There's no easy answer here. I did some research, and by the end of this video, I think I have a pretty good answer of what they need to print to be able to have enough stock on the shelves so everyone can buy the cards they need. We're going to have some fun today. How do we even go about answering the question if we're just some caveman basement dweller card player? We don't have any kind of insider knowledge. Surely didn't go around asking stores how many boxes they plan to order. But what if history could be our guide? What if someone gave us some numbers about how many boxes they had to print in the past? Well, luckily, they did. And I know what you're saying. Lorcana has no history. How could we do that? I mean, besides the 9,000 cards they printed for promos, that definitely weren't enough. Well, there's other card games, and we're going to use the clues. And then we're going to make some pretty educated guesses on how many cards that we need. Yeah, that's not going to work. Magic's actually a terrible comp here for what Lorcana is going to be. That's really the big player. What we need is something more like a kid-focused game. What about Pokemon? Well, it's a good thing that an article came out and did some of the work for us. Came out in 1999. Obviously, you can see here there's a lot of sets. But the interesting part of this article is actually this Pokemon Company released a staggering number of cards produced in the last year. It's interesting because they did this to fight the all-time sales high and also the scalping of the last couple years. So how many cards did they make? So total, Pokemon has produced 52.9 billion cards, which of course means that they've done 2 billion cards for 24 years, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. 9.7 billion of those cards were actually made in the last year. Think about that. 1/5 of all Pokemon cards were actually produced in the last year. That's how hot the TCG market is right now. To produce 9.7 billion cards in the last year, that means they actually produced 32 million booster boxes. That's a lot of cards. So here we have a ceiling of how many cards we need. We're obviously not going to make more cards than Pokemon, but I don't think Lorcana can even print that many cards. So let's go to a different game and see if there's some more reasonable expectations of what we need. So what game do we go to next? I mean, there's lots of games to choose from, but what if we choose one that's focusing on hobby stores, kind of like how Lorcana is doing? There's this game called Flesh and Blood, and if you're not familiar with this game, basically it's a war against online TCGs. It's called Flesh and Blood because they want people to play in person, not online, so it's a physical card game, and it released October 2019, so it's only been around for about 4 years in the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. They're calling out to Japan soon, but we're not going to worry about that. They've targeted local game stores for their distribution. Well, funny enough, that's what Lorcana is trying to do. I'll show you these numbers in a second for their sales numbers. So according to Rudy at Alpha Investments, Flesh and Blood only has a 30% market penetration at local game stores. It's not in Targets, it's not in Walmarts. That does affect these numbers, and I just want you to think about that when we use this as a comparison. Disney is a much bigger audience. It's not a brand new IP, and I'm not even counting Disney collectors, Lorcana players, and Lorcana card collectors. So I'm hoping they're relatively equivalent to a 4-year-old game with a 30% market penetration. Maybe I'm shooting too high. Maybe I'm still really low, especially with all the scalpers. So let's take a look at the numbers. So here we are. We've got the Flesh and Blood print run update. So these are in booster boxes. I know when Rudy was talking about this, he said this number and it was talking about booster boxes. So that's what I'm going to assume they are. A booster box has 24 packs in it. So here for their latest release, they have 140,000 booster boxes in North America. And I'm only going to go with North America numbers, not the rest of the world numbers. I'm not familiar with how this is going to do in French. If you're from France and you think it's going to go crazy, go let me know in the comments. The first release of Flesh and Blood only did 16,700 boxes. Then they reprinted it and added another 144,000 boxes. And here their latest set and even the set before that did 127 and 140,000 boxes. I think that's really a good number for Lorcana to target, is about 140,000 boxes. And you might think I'm nuts, but I've got some other math for you here. Okay, I was also skeptical about this 140,000 boxes number. I was like, there's no way that's how many boxes they have to print just to stay on the store shelves. But then I took a look and I was like, well, how many Walmarts and Targets are there? In the United States, there's 1,954 Targets, and there's 4,632 Walmarts, for a combined 6,586 locations. That's just in the United States. So I divided 140 by 6.5, so that means each store will only get 21 total boxes. Think about that. 21 boxes for a 3-month release. That's only 7 boxes a month. 7 booster boxes a month to stock a Walmart or a Target. Doesn't seem very reasonable to me. And we're also leaving out all LGSs here. So I just want you to put that in perspective. But then I was like, well, how many Targets and Walmarts are in my town? So we've got 4 Walmarts and 3 Targets for 7 stores. So with these 21 boxes times my 7 stores in my town, that means that I would get 147 total booster boxes printed and sent. Now we've got a population here of 292,000. So if we take the 24 packs per box, and we get 3,528 boxes. And if we divide those 3,528 packs by the 292,000 people, we're going to come up with 1% of people in the town could buy a pack. Kind of puts the whole thing in perspective. There was a survey done, and TCG players actually make up about 10% of the population of the United States, and that number was even from like 2017. Let me ask you, do you think that number is high or low for what they should be printing? So I think it's absurd to think that 10% of the population is buying Lorcana, but 2-3% possibly, especially because you're going to bring in players who aren't normal TCG players, they're just Disney fans. I think 3% of the population might be a realistic thing to happen. So even if the game doesn't entirely sell out before chapter 2 comes out, I can see players getting a late start wanting to pick up the first chapter. So I think the first chapter is always going to sell well. I don't really see any risk of them overprinting at 140,000 boxes. Even if the game doesn't do well, I think those first ones will sell out. But I think we can easily add 100,000 boxes just to be safe, because we've got a lot of stores to cover, and I really don't think 27 boxes per store is gonna tide everyone over. Some of you probably aren't old enough to remember the Death of Superman comic. My dad went out and bought 2 of them when it came out because he knew it was going to be such a collector's item, and I think scalpers are going to do the same thing. So we had one we could open and one we could just keep. That investment now is worth a whole whopping $12 off a $3 comic because DC printed the living poop out of it. DC knew that everyone was going to buy it, and instead of being like the first Superman, the Death of Superman is really not that special, and it's been reprinted into oblivion. But for a healthy game, people need to be able to get their hands on cards. We don't want a $150 booster box going to $500. And you know scalpers are going to grab these and hold on to them, not open them, and hope they have the first edition Pokemon cards in 20 years. Have something that's worth $100,000. It's not going to happen. It's not healthy for the game. If you want to hold your cards for 20 years, go ahead. But how do games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic work? Because they're a lot bigger. They don't just print cards and guess. Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic actually work on a 6-month window where they do a print to order. So they announce the set, they put out orders, people put in their orders, and then they print cards. So print runs are actually variable. Let's say they're in 20,000 increments, where they might be able to print off to 1 million cards in a print run. And depending on where the orders are at, they might order 80,000 cards. They might order 100,000 cards, whatever in the print run. People just keep bringing in orders. So it's possible 5 months into the release, someone wants to order a whole bunch more, and they'll just keep reprinting them. There's no real difference between these reprints, and the print run lasts for 6 months, and as long as orders keep coming in, they keep printing cards. And the Lorcana team has said that they plan to make the first edition the same as reprints. So there's not going to be any special marking on the first edition, so that's going to cause any kind of FOMO. It's just every card's going to look the same. If they do need to reprint, there shouldn't be any problems. It'll just be scheduling time to get in with the printer and, package all the cards and get them out to distribution. I don't think there's a huge risk. We're going to need 150,000 to 250,000 boxes. I think those numbers are safe. Do you think I'm out of line? Do you think there's going to be extra fear in August? Like the video if you're still watching, because you obviously like it. But I think a healthy printing of Lorcana is needed. And even if it does poor by Disney standards, for 1% of the population, they're going to need to print a lot of cards. I'm excited for more numbers come out. If the Lorcana team actually does tell us how many they printed, I'll do a video on it. See you in the next video.